Welcome to the debate. Imagine you are, well, a building inspector. You're standing on the sidewalk and you're looking up at this beautiful, newly constructed balcony on the side of a luxury high-rise.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Right, and from down on the street, it looks absolutely phenomenal. It's got the sleek glass, perfect lighting, and it implies this incredible lifestyle of luxury and, competence.
Stability.
Sure, it looks expensive.
Exactly.
But as an inspector, you don't actually care about what the balcony implies. You care about the structural load.
Right. The actual physics of it.
Yeah, you want to get up there and see the concrete, you want to see the rebar, the mounting brackets, the bolts. Because if that concrete is, say, still wet, or if the rebar was never even installed, you do not let anyone stand on that balcony.
Absolutely not.
Right. It does not matter how beautiful it looks from the street.
And, the reality is, in the professional world, that balcony is a resume bullet. It's a LinkedIn headline or a carefully crafted interview answer.
Precisely.
Most of the time, when we evaluate professionals in the market, we just look at the balcony from the street and say, yeah, looks sturdy enough to me. We accept that surface-level presentation because, frankly, digging into the foundation takes a lot of time.
It takes effort, yeah.
But when you step into the methodology of the living professional record, the LPR framework, that surface-level acceptance is just completely dismantled.
It is, which is why today we are exploring the core concept of claim maturity. The central question we're debating is this: does assigning rigorous, highly disciplined maturity statuses to every single professional claim serve as an essential mechanism to protect a person's trust and credibility?
Or, on the flip side, does this strict governance inherently act as a restrictive gatekeeper, one that stifles a professional's market positioning and actually forces them to undersell themselves?
Right. To set the table, my position today is that claim maturity is a vital, non-negotiable governance tool that protects a professional's dignity and trust by ensuring every claim is made only as responsibly as the evidence allows.
And I will argue that applying stringent, hyper-precise maturity labels to every piece of evidence risks boxing professionals into rigid past tense categories that can obscure their broader value and trajectory. Because if you're listening to this right now, just think about your own career. When you start having to label your own lived, hard-earned experience as merely emerging or, needs confirmation before you are even allowed to speak about it, you introduce a tremendous amount of friction into how you navigate your professional life.
I hear that, but let me dive right into the core of why this governance matters so deeply. It fundamentally changes how we view professional storytelling. Claim maturity is entirely about responsibility. It is never about how impressive a claim sounds in a vacuum.
Right, but...
Wait, let me just lay this out. It draws on a core doctrine of the approach, which is, do not make the claim bigger, make the claim truer.
Okay, truer.
Yes, because under this logic, not all claims are ready for the same use. Think about your own skills, right? A claim may be verified. A claim may be supported. A claim may be emerging.
Right.
A claim may be aspirational. A claim may need confirmation. A claim may be stale.
Stale, meaning you haven't done it in a while.
Exactly. Maybe in 10 years, a claim may be private, a claim may be unsafe, or a claim may need to be retired completely.
Okay, that is quite the taxonomy to apply to a person.
Well, see, that's the thing. It is a big taxonomy, but it exists for a very specific reason. Claim maturity is not about how impressive the claim sounds. It is about how responsibly the claim can be made. And here's the crucial distinction, and this is where people get tripped up.
Okay, what is it?
Claim status belongs to the claim, not the person.
Right.
The purpose is not to discourage the client. The purpose is to protect trust. A person might have verified claims, emerging claims, and aspirational claims all at exactly the same time.
We all do, right?
We do, but by separating the status of the claim from the identity of the person, we protect their dignity. And we completely prevent the catastrophic erosion of credibility that comes from overclaiming.
But we really have to recognize that the so-called evidence-to-claim gap,
The space between what you did and what you call it.
exactly. That gap is frequently subjective. And when we start policing that gap too aggressively, we trigger a phenomenon in the market known as underclaiming.
How so? Give me an example of how mapping the truth causes someone to actually underclaim.
Well, look, The methodology tells us to look purely at the evidence, right? So say you have someone who coordinated a massive shift in their team's workflow. They didn't have a formal manager title.
Right. They didn't have budget authority, but they were the absolute center of gravity making that shift happen. If we strictly apply claim maturity, we have to treat their claim of leadership as unsupported or even risky, simply because it lacks, concrete historical metrics or a formal mandate.
Because it is risky.
But if a professional is forced to downgrade their language just to satisfy a taxonomic rule, their true capacity is hidden. We end up minimizing their broader value pattern just to check a box.
I see why you think that, but let me give you a different perspective on how these labels actually function in practice, especially regarding the psychology of an interview.
Okay.
You use the word downgrade as if the framework is punishing them. But statuses like unsupported, risky, stale, or unsafe, those are private governance labels.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning they are used internally on what we call a claim map. They are not public identity labels you stick on your forehead for the world to see.
But they absolutely dictate what you are allowed to put on your forehead.
No, they dictate what you can safely defend. Let's look at a concrete example. Suppose a professional completes an introductory weekend certificate in artificial intelligence.
Very common right now.
Super common. AI is incredibly hot. So they might want to render themselves publicly on their resume as an AI strategy leader.
Sure, they want to capitalize on the trend.
Right. But the methodology steps in and says, no, based on a weekend certificate, that claim is unsupported. Instead, it limits the claim to developing AI literacy, which is an emerging claim. This is a private mechanism to prevent credential inflation. It stops the professional from walking into a trap of their own making.
I understand the protective element there, I really do. But let's look at the psychological and honestly the operational constraint that places on the individual. I liken this to owning a high-performance sports car, right?
Okay, a sports car.
Yeah, but being told by an instructor that you can only drive it in an empty parking lot until you earn a very special, verifiable license.
That sounds like good advice for a sports car.
Well, hold on. Let's move away from the weekend AI certificate and look at something more nuanced. Imagine an employee who drafted a highly complex shared onboarding checklist that their entire department adopted during a period of severe turnover.
Okay.
They effectively built and coordinated the entire onboarding process. But because they didn't officially own the enterprise strategy, the framework restricts them from claiming they led or transformed the onboarding process.
Correct.
It forces them into a highly restrained language. My concern is that by keeping them in the parking lot, by preventing them from claiming leadership just because they lack primary authority, you are masking their true operational capacity to drive change.
But let's follow your sports car analogy to its logical conclusion, okay?
Okay.
If they take that sports car out onto the highway without actually knowing how to handle it at high speeds, they are going to crash. And that crash, in a professional context, happens in the interview chair.
Wait, you think claiming you led an onboarding process when you actually just built the checklist leads to a crash?
I absolutely do, because you have to think about the psychology of the interviewer. Good interviewers are highly attuned to hollow claims.
Fair enough.
So what happens when a careful, rigorous interviewer asks for the reality beneath that word led? The candidate says they transformed enterprise onboarding.
Right.
And the interviewer leans in and says, fascinating. Walk me through the budget you managed for that transformation. What change management framework did you utilize to secure executive buy-in?
Well, yeah, the candidate freezes.
Exactly. The claim collapses, and in that room, trust is destroyed in an instant. The interviewer doesn't just doubt the onboarding claim, they now doubt every single other word on that person's resume.
It taints the whole well.
Yes. The private governance labels aren't a straitjacket to hold you back. They are a seatbelt to keep you from flying through the windshield when the market hits the brakes on your narrative.
Okay, that is a very vivid picture of the downside of overclaiming, and I grant you that.
Thank you.
But, and this is a big but, this tension over how we define capacity leads directly to another major issue I have with this framework. It's exactly what you just brought up, how it forces professionals to choose their verbs.
Verbs are everything.
Right. Specifically, I am looking at the strict policing of ownership verbs versus the broader value those professionals actually provide.
The ownership verb is arguably one of the strongest claim controls in the entire methodology. It demands absolute precision.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that this precision always yields the most accurate picture of a human being's potential. The framework enforces a very rigid hierarchy of verbs.
It's structured, yes.
Highly structured. At the top, you have owned. Below that, led. Then managed, coordinated, supported, and finally, observed.
Right.
It insists that you can only use the verb owned if you had primary responsibility and authority. You can only use led if you explicitly directed the work or the people.
Which makes sense.
But if you just aligned information or made sure handoffs happen smoothly, you are forced down the hierarchy to use coordinated.
Because that is what actually happened.
But is it the whole truth? The source material itself warns about underclaiming when someone says, "Oh, I just helped out," completely hiding their real contribution. But isn't the framework inadvertently causing this very underclaiming?
I don't see how.
Well, by forcing a professional to use coordinated instead of led, simply because they lacked formal primary authority, the framework undersells them. The reality of modern work is highly cross-functional. True leadership often happens without authority.
That's true, but
If you force someone to say they merely supported or coordinated a transition, you might be hiding the fact that they were the absolute center of gravity, the only reason the project didn't fall apart. To the market, coordinated sounds like administrative support. Led sounds like executive potential.
that's an interesting point, though I would frame the solution very differently. Look, I completely agree that we don't want to undersell the glue people in an organization.
They are essential.
They are. But the goal of the methodology is not to choose verbs for sheer power. Choosing a verb for impact rather than truth is the textbook definition of overclaiming.
Even if it reflects their overall value?
Yes, because the doctrine states very clearly the strongest verb is always the most accurate defensible verb. You are worried that coordinated hides the value, but the methodology actually separates the verb from the value pattern specifically to solve the exact problem you're raising.
Okay, walk me through that. How does separating the verb fix the fact that coordinated just flat out sounds weaker than led?
It only sounds weaker if you attach those verbs to generic, empty skills. Think about how most people write a resume. They use inflated verbs and generic labels. Led project management, strong communicator, natural leader.
Right, the usual buzzwords.
Exactly. The framework teaches us to look past those hollow labels. Instead, it maps evidence to specific value patterns.
Meaning the recurring way a person actually creates value in the real world.
Precisely. So let's go back to your onboarding example. Instead of making the unsupported, frankly dangerous claim that you led the enterprise transformation, which we know will collapse in an interview, you use the defensible verb coordinated.
Okay.
But you attach it to the true value pattern. You don't just say, coordinated the onboarding. You say, coordinated tracking structures that made open work, owners, and next steps visible, which stabilized operations during a period of high turnover.
Oh, wow. Okay, so the power isn't in the verb itself, it's in the extreme specificity of the causality.
Exactly. That is an incredibly powerful, deeply compelling professional narrative. It shows exactly how your brain works and how you solve problems. And more importantly, from a governance perspective, it is completely bulletproof.
Because you can prove it.
Yes, no interviewer can puncture it because it is exactly what happened. If they ask you how you stabilized operations, you can talk for 20 minutes about the tracking structures you built because you actually built them.
Okay, I will concede that when articulated that way, the value pattern does carry its own weight. It paints a very vivid picture.
It really does.
But, and I have to push back here, you are still relying on a highly sophisticated market audience. A very astute hiring manager has to read the word coordinated, read the rest of the sentence, and recognize the leadership inherent in that action.
Well, we want to attract astute hiring managers.
Fair, but let's pivot to the future for a second. Because if the goal is defensibility over sheer power, we have to ask how this framework accommodates a professional's forward momentum. Can someone ever pivot into a totally new role, or are they anchored entirely to their past verified evidence?
Oh, they absolutely can pivot. The framework is not designed to trap you in your past. That is exactly the function of what we call positioning hypotheses and market translation.
And this right here is where my concern about friction really peaks.
Why?
When the framework handles forward-looking career movement, it demands that a client draft a positioning hypothesis. It treats this career goal as a disciplined guess that has to be tested rather than a final brand you can just step into.
Which it is. It's a hypothesis.
Right. But say a professional wants to move into a new space, a high school teacher who wants to move into corporate learning and development, or a military logistics officer moving into civilian supply chain operations.
Great examples.
The framework evaluates the market fit, right? It categorizes these transitions into lanes: direct fit, adjacent fit, or bridge required.
Right. And which lane you are in dictates how much maturity your claims currently have for that specific market.
Exactly. But if it's a bridge-required lane, the framework explicitly says the professional needs more proof, more projects, or more credentials before they can claim they are a fit.
Because they aren't a fit yet.
But my worry here is that treating career goals merely as aspirational or bridge-required creates a tremendous amount of friction for the user. It treats a non-fit as a barrier. Telling a client they must build proof before rendering places the heavy burden of perfect historical evidence on a future-facing transition.
I mean, I'm not convinced by that line of reasoning, honestly, because you are treating preparation as if it were a punishment. Let me offer a different analogy.
Okay, go for it.
You do not invite traffic onto a bridge while the bridge is still being built and tell the drivers it's a finished highway.
Okay, sure.
That is exactly what happens when people try to fake it until they make it. A positioning hypothesis is a blueprint. It's a testable direction. Identifying what the methodology calls proof gaps, such as missing metrics, a missing recent example, or lacking a witness who can vouch for your work, that is not a rejection of the professional's potential.
It feels like one, though.
But it's not. It is a concrete action item.
But an action item that effectively says you cannot speak about this yet.
No, it says you cannot speak about this publicly as established fact yet. And that distinction is everything. A proof gap gives the professional a specific target.
Okay, so how does the teacher do that?
If you are that teacher moving to corporate training and you realize you have no evidence of working with adult corporate learners, that's a proof gap. The framework says, don't just write corporate trainer on your LinkedIn and hope no one notices.
Because that would be an unsupported claim.
Exactly. Instead, go create a work sample. Volunteer to run a training session for a local business. Go earn a specific credential. You physically build the bridge.
So it actively maps the acquisition of new evidence, rather than just telling you no.
Exactly. Furthermore, the framework maps claims to avoid. Let's say a client worked on a highly confidential implementation for a major tech company, but they signed an NDA.
Oh, that happens all the time.
All the time. The framework explicitly guards against naming the client or the sensitive system, marking those claims as private or unsafe. These are protective guardrails. They ensure that when the claim is finally rendered and presented to the market, it is unshakable. A rendering without claim mapping simply becomes polished fiction.
I hear the value in the blueprint analogy. I really do. No one wants to drive their career off an unfinished bridge.
Right.
And I appreciate that a proof gap is an action item, not just a closed door. But we also have to recognize the reality of the modern job market. Companies often hire for trajectory. They hire for potential.
They do.
They hire for agility. The strictness of the bridge-required designation, the demand for applied practice and witnesses before rendering, it can feel incredibly heavy. It's the classic entry-level paradox engineered into a career transition framework, right? You need experience to get the job, but you need the job to get the experience.
Which is why the concept of adjacent fit lanes exists within the methodology. You don't always need to build a massive new bridge. Sometimes you just need to translate what you already have.
Translating skills.
Yes, if you have related evidence, like our military logistics officer, you don't throw away your past. You translate that evidence-backed value into the civilian market's language.
Okay.
You don't pretend you managed a commercial retail supply chain if you didn't. You find the closest responsible language for what your record actually supports. It is a nuanced translation. It is not a brick wall.
And that translation step, the actual human element of finding the right words is critical.
It is.
If we pull back and look at our positions today, I maintain my stance. While precision and evidence are undeniably vital to a healthy job market, obsessing over strict claim maturity statuses, categorizing every single piece of a person's professional life into supported, emerging, stale, or unsafe, it risks boxing dynamic professionals into rigid, past tense categories. It can unintentionally minimize their broader trajectory and potential if this framework is applied without a deep sense of humanity and context.
And I maintain that claim maturity is the ultimate safeguard of professional truth. By ensuring a claim is mature, safe, and relevant before it ever sees public rendering, the methodology protects the client's most valuable, most fragile asset, their trust.
It is fascinating how closely those two perspectives actually orbit each other.
It really is.
Despite our disagreement on how restrictive the governance feels in practice, there is a clear convergence here. We both completely agree that evidence must anchor professional narratives. The doctrine that skills are claims is something I think we both find incredibly powerful.
Oh, entirely.
Slapping the word leadership or strategic visionary on a profile without proof isn't just lazy. It's a claim demanding evidence.
Absolutely. We are very much aligned on the fact that unchecked overclaiming is deeply toxic to a professional's credibility.
Yeah.
The moment your language outruns your evidence, your entire narrative structure is at risk of collapse during a rigorous interview.
It is a very delicate balance, finding the intricate equilibrium between telling the truth at the right level of confidence while simultaneously finding the strongest possible market translation. That is the true art of navigating this methodology.
It is an art, and it's important to remember that this governance we've discussed today is really only the preparation phase.
Right, there's a lot more.
There is so much more to explore in the broader LPR framework. Specifically, how these carefully governed, meticulously mapped claims are eventually transformed into compelling, public-facing materials. Resumes, interview narratives. That happens later on in the process.
We will leave it to you, the listener, to form your own conclusion about where the line between responsible claim governance and professional constraint truly lies. Do these labels protect you, or do they hold you back?
Think back to our building inspector at the start of the show. The next time you see a beautifully polished professional claim, either your own or someone else's, ask yourself, is this just a glass balcony suspended in the air? Or has someone gone down to the foundation, mapped the concrete, checked the rebar, and ensured that it is truly safe enough to stand on? Thank you for joining us on this intellectual journey. We will see you next time.